everyone, welcome to the studio. This is March Paint Along, but it's edition 4. So this is the video where we finished the painting. And if you recall, we left off last week where I had gotten to the point where I wasn't sure what else I needed to do. And in my mind, I really thought I wanted to have a kind of looser, almost more of an abstracted landscape rather than one that had a lot of detail. I'll see if I can keep that up, but I always find that I tend to add more detail. I tend to be not as abstract as I think I want to be. So we'll see where it goes today. But what I want to do is bring you closer to the painting, just as a reminder of where we left off. And one of the things that I did was made my punch list. So I always like to write down the things that I think I need to do to make those finishing marks, so that I can really stay on top of those marks and not put down more than the painting actually needs. So by writing it down, I find that I am more in control, I guess you could say. And if I don't write it down, I tend to look at the painting and before you know it, I have made marks everywhere, and I could possibly ruin the freshness or the things that I actually really did like. So let's talk about what happened when I stepped away from this painting after a couple days, and I came back and I looked at it, and something bothered me. And it may bother you already, but it took me a couple days before I decided it really bothered me. And that is the way the water ends at the bottom of the painting, or the foreground. The foreground water feels to me, now that I look at it, like a very boring shape. It's just this kind of long, elongated, rectangular shape, kind of like a worm, but a fat, light value worm, but still, nonetheless, it's just boring. And then when you look at the bits of the pieces of land that go behind there, they are also similar in shape and size. I didn't write that down on my punch list, but they're boring. And this guy back here is similar in the height, or I guess you would say the height of the grasses. So you've got this shape, and this shape. They're all very, very similar. And that makes for an uninteresting painting because everything is a little bit too even. So what do I need to do? I have to resolve that problem, the worm problem, or the boring shape problem, you might want to say. And then when I look at my reference photo, just to give me some ideas, what I realize is I put more grass in my painting than there is in the photo. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. The photo is just there to give me ideas. But I can't really ever make it become that unless I eliminate a lot of the grass. And I think that would be too much to change. Not that I couldn't, but it would be too much to change, and I'd rather not do that. So somehow I need to change up this foreground water shape. So the first thing I thought is, well, maybe it needs to be darkened because it's just so light, it kind of just pulls your eye. You can't really, it just kind of stops you somehow. It's not doing its job. And a lot of times if you have a darker foreground, it allows you to kind of slide into the painting. So that could be something. But I also think that maybe I would add more grass. Like maybe I need to break up this shape and add, more grass in the foreground and make this more like contain the water rather than just let this be all water. But I'm not sure if I want to do that either. So it's really sometimes tricky to pre-visualize if you're going to make a change like that. One thing that you can do is make a quick study. And it really is worth your time and energy to take out a small piece of paper and play around with ideas to see what you might do with those shapes. What I'm going to do, instead of even taking out papers, because I already have kind of my quick drawing that I was showing you. So what if I, I don't think it's going to show up though. Let's see. Can you see it? Okay, so this is the way I have the land right now. And all of this is water, right? So what if instead I decide I want to put some grass in the foreground and contain the water? I think that kind of can work. So this helps me visualize what would happen if I blocked the water without me actually touching the painting. Because once I touch the painting and I start to add more layers, then you know I have to be more committed to that. The other thing that you can do is take a piece of scrap paper, and I just did some fun little grass, and I can just kind of put it where I think I might want to add the grass, and that can also help me visualize. Now, if I did, you know, 2 sections, that would help a little bit better. But I am kind of liking that I might want to have some more grass down in this foreground rather than just this strip of water. So these are 2 ways that can help you visualize. If you're good with Photoshop or manipulating photos on different programs, what's the one that I like to use on my iPad? Procreate. Procreate app on the iPad allows you to put a photo in, or you know, you can put your photo of your painting, and then you can actually make adjustments in the app, and then you can pre-visualize, or visualize rather, what would happen if you actually did that with pastel. I think I would like to do something like that for a future video or post to show you how you can do that on the Procreate app, because that is a very useful tool. But what I'm going to do is make the corrections by adding more of the grass. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a stiff brush, and I'm going to just brush off some of the water that I've already put in. It's not completely necessary to brush away pastel, and by the way, next week this week we're going to be I'm sharing a video on how to make adjustments or corrections to a painting, and one of those ways is to take a brush and brush off you know, the layer of pastel that you don't want to have in there, and that's going to give you a little bit more tooth. The other thing that I like to do once I've brushed off is to spray it with some workable fixative. And that will also help increase the tooth, as long as you don't put too thick of a layer of fixative, because if you do, if you get it too wet, it gets too slick and you can't put pastel on top. So I think we're going to be okay. So we're going to let that dry. But in the video that I'm going to be sharing later this week, there'll be some tips on how you can make those corrections. And those are my top go-to. Brush it off or spray it with workable fixative. You can also use canned air if you want to get remove pastel that's a little bit more precise. People have used magic erasers. Regular white pearl erasers will remove pastel. But I really, you know, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to just use a brush. All right, it's going to be dry enough. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to add some darker grass, kind of on both sides. I just want to contain the water. I'm going to start with the dark. Now, I can tell you right now, I like that already much better, because I've eliminated that kind of bar, you know, long bar of light water that kind of didn't allow me to slip into the painting and get back into the distance. So it was a very simple move to come in with some dark green pastel to add some more of the grasses. Now, what I have to decide is, at this point, I just use another dark blue, because I'm trying to just really, you know, put the darks down first. But what I have to decide is, I think I want to have 2 sections of grass. Now, I'm no longer looking at the photo, and that's because I'm not copying what's in the photo. I'm trying to make this into a better composition. So I want to add another layer of grasses so that it's not just one big clump, it's several clumps together, if that makes sense. And I actually don't mind that there's hints of water in between some of the grasses. In other words, this is low tide and the grassy areas are, or high tide rather, and the grassy areas are getting flooded by the water. So I'm going to I'm okay with leaving some of the water peeking through. Now I'm going to give it another quick light spray of fixative because I want to really cement those darks into place. I'm going to let that dry for a second. While I let that dry, I'm going to move up to this area. See this? I just noticed this dark base of the underneath this grass. It's very much a worm, a skinny worm, but a worm nonetheless. So I need to go in there with some green and break it up a little bit. I like the dark there, but it was just too much of a dark, skinny dark shape. All right, so now we're going to add some light to some of the grasses. So just the tops of some of these grasses will get a little bit of light. And let's light it up a little bit more. So I'm going to go with a lighter, brighter yellow-green. Add a little bit of light. So I have several layers of grasses working in this foreground now. Instead of just one skinny layer, we have several. All right. So now let's evaluate it a little bit more. I'm now satisfied with what I did to the foreground by blocking that water. But I need to get a little bit more detail in some of the grasses. But let's talk about the second thing on the punch list, which was I'm asking myself, what is the visual journey in this painting? Where does the eye go? Where does the viewer's eye go? And where do I want the viewer's eye to go? And if you remember from week 1, we had our butterfly, and we need to give a visual journey for the butterfly. We need places for the butterfly to land and rest, but then something of interest that would attract the butterfly so they can enjoy the whole painting. So I need to have the butterfly come flying into the painting and grab its attention somewhere, maybe in the foreground, so somewhere in this area here, and then I want to pull the butterfly over to this area so it can enjoy this area, back over here, back over to back into the distance, right, and then somehow leave the painting. So what is that? That tells me that's very helpful. It seems silly, but it's very helpful because it tells me that I need a little more clarity, maybe in this area, a little more contrast over here, and then something to pull the eye over to the left side, and then back over to the right, and back over to the left, and then to exit. So that's going to help me make those finishing marks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out my box of grass pastels. They're just a odd assortment of hard pastels, hard pastels. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to make some linear grass marks with a bright yellow-green to begin with. So, and I don't want them to be like soldiers, like this, right? I want them to be dancing. So I'm using a varied pressure so that that pastel just kind of skips along. I press and I release. I press it and I release so that I can get nice, painterly grass marks. We don't want them to look stiff. We also want to direct the eye, right? So we want to pull the eye in from the edges. So I'm pulling my grasses over from the edges into the painting. But I always like to have a rogue piece of grass go in the opposite way because otherwise it wouldn't look natural. Unless, of course, it was a super windy day. And this is not a super windy day because if you remember, my story for this particular painting is tranquility, right? So it's about this peacefulness. I'm going to take another kind of duller yellow-green and kind of just fill in. And it may seem to you that I'm just scribbling, and partly I am just scribbling, but I'm scribbling with a purpose. I'm being very mindful of where I make those scribbles. They're just not everywhere. I also want to come in and add some darker grasses. This is a dark blue coming up from the bottom edge, so that we can imagine that the water, you know, was still here, but yet we're containing it with some of the grasses. Put some taller blades with the darker blue. You can see them. Now, I had mentioned earlier when I first started this video that I perhaps wanted to have this painting be a little bit more abstracted. In other words, not have a lot of detail in the grasses, and I wasn't sure how that was going to work out. So you can see now that I've gone beyond that, and I'm getting in a little bit more detail. But I don't mind that. That's an instance, and we've talked about this before. Sometimes your painting starts talking to you, and says, you know what, I really want a little more detail in here. That would make me happier. I want a little more clarity in the grasses, especially in the foreground grasses. That's not to say that it wouldn't have been bad just to leave it the way it was. There's really nothing wrong with it. It just depends on what your comfort level is. How much detail do you want? All right, now remember we wanted to pull the eye from over here to we want to pull the eye into the painting and then over to the left. So I'm pushing a little bit harder and making some grass marks that you can actually really see. A little bit harder marks. Now, when the eye comes over to this side, what is there to see? I'm coming in with that red-violet. Remember, the red-violet was in the underpainting. A lot of times I like to pull the underpainting color back out into the painting. So I'm going to use that red-violet just to peek a few red-violet marks. Are the grasses red-violet? Not necessarily, but it's interesting, So then when we come over here, we need something to hold the eye. So I'm just pressing a little bit harder, making a little bit more of a contrast between the light and dark. And over in this area as well. This area's a little bit empty and boring, so I'm going to add that brighter green over here just to say, oh, okay, when you come over here, there's something to look at. Now we need to pull the eye back over to the other side. So we'll just add some more of that lighter green over here. Up on this level, we're not going to see a tremendous level of detail in the grasses, especially as we start to go back into the painting, into the distance. But we can still see just a little bit of detail in this middle tier. So we want the eye to come over here, so I'm going to add I'm pushing very hard and make a couple of marks over here that are just a little bit of eye candy. In other words, you go over here, the water's going to pull you back over here, then there's something interesting to look at. What I want to do is take the pink in the water and press a little bit harder so that we can see it a little bit more. We know it's going to pull our eye back over here and back in the distance, but I'm going to press harder so we have more contrast, a harder edge. So now when we come back into the distance, what is there for the eye to see? I mean, it was Robert Onrait who said the eye should not be led to where there's nothing to see. So if I'm leading the viewer back, or the butterfly, back into the distance, but there's really nothing of interest there, we are not really taking full advantage of our powers as the orchestrator of our paintings. So I'm going to come in and really press hard with this light dull green just to give some oomph to that mark. Really make it flat. took away from the blue, so I'm going to come back and increase the blue just a hair. And I think what I want to do is just add maybe a hint of perhaps a little building or two. So I'm taking that peachy color and add a little bit of light to it. And all I'm doing is I'm making some small little marks. And they need some darker red violet for their roofs. I don't know. We need a little door. All I'm doing is little tiny marks, little teeny tiny marks, and what that does is say, oh, hey guys, there's something back there, maybe some sort of dwelling. Let's put a couple of little vertical lines to say, okay, maybe there's docks back there, and these are their sailboats. But this whole idea of just go ahead and making a couple of marks to hint at the fact that maybe there's some little bits of life. People are living back there. And then finally we need a graceful exit, so I want to use that pale pink in the sky and then just make some harder edge kind of cloud marks. Remember, we were trying to pull the eye down into the painting. And I'm just noticing over here that we've got a little bit of worm action in the water, so we can increase some of the green right in there. Then we'll get a little bit more of an interesting kind of flow to the water. So I think really I'm at the point now where I'm going to stop. I think the main thing that was bothering me was the foreground water, and I feel better about containing it. And I used this little sketchy little study to help me decide if that was going to be the right decision or not. And that was very helpful. So I'm going to stop right now. I think that's it for this paint along demo. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've got a surprise for you next Wednesday. There are 5 Wednesdays in this month, so that means we finished our paint along. So those of you who are silver members, what are we going to do next Wednesday? I've got a surprise, so stay tuned.